We're going to continue talking about the South African Australopithecus species, and we will introduce a new species, which is exhibited in this slide, which is called Australopithecus robustus, as opposed to Australopithecus africanus that we've been talking about. But before we do that, I want to show you a little bit more about Australopithecus africanus. This is the classic skull, Mrs. Ples, as it's called sometimes, or now some people call it Ms. Ples, and it had cranial capacity of about 440 cubic centimeters, and we'll look at that in a little more detail later. It doesn't have huge brow ridges, as you can see. It has a nice smooth aspect to the top of the cranium. There are no crests or bony extrusions on that, and it has sort of a projecting little face, as you can see. And in the background, we're looking at the plaque that commemorates, I have to put my glasses on to read this, that says the site of STS5. That was the fifth hominin found at Sterkfontein. That's why it's numbered 5, and STS stands for Sterkfontein, of Australopithecus africanus, parentheses, because remember Broom originally called it Plesianthropus. Mrs. Ples discovered on the, I can't read it, I think it says the 18th of April, 1947 by Dr. Robert Broom and Mr. John Robinson. So that commemorates it. It is permanently installed there, and it's attached to the breccia to the spot from where they think it actually originated. So these creatures had relatively large incisors. They had sort of bulbous molars and premolars, but not enormous. They're larger than ours. There's no crest on the top of the skull, which you will see why that is so important to notice. And these are two wonderful specimens from Sterkfontein, STS-71 and STS-17, that gives you an impression of what they look like and a better understanding of the shape of the cranium. Well, in 1938, Broom, loving to name new specimens, from a site known as Kromdraai. And here's a nice map down here where you can see Kromdraai is, all of these 5 sites are clustered together, okay, right in here. All right, so just as a reminder, Sterkfontein we talked about and visited. We're now going to go to Kromdraai, and there is a Swartkrans, which we will talk about also. Well, what happened was Broom loved to spread the word about the ape man, as it was called. And so he would lecture in schools and museums and all sorts of venues. And he went to a school one day, I think it was elementary or high school, and he was lecturing, and a student came up to him and reached in his pocket and said, "Look at these teeth." And Broom recognized them immediately as human teeth. He said, "Where did you get them?" And he kind of bribed him with a candy bar or something. And they went out together to the Transvaal region to an area known as Kromdraai. And the boy said this is where they came from. And lo and behold, with more work and excavation, they recovered parts of a skull, as you can see, and it's not much, but it's part of a skull, and a beautiful mandible, lower jaw there, and some other bones of the ankle, and so forth and so on. And of course, since this was something new, Broom said, needs a new name. And he called it Paranthropus, near man, in this case, toward man, I should say. And because the large bulbous size of the teeth were very robustly built, he called it Paranthropus robustus. Now, some people still use the term Paranthropus for these robustly built Australopithecines. And we'll see this in East Africa, where we've got some really hyper-robust Australopithecus. But we're going to put everything into Australopithecus. And we're going to retain for the South African robust forms, which are thought to be highly specialized vegetarians, the species name robustus. So we replace Paranthropus with Australopithecus. And this is an exciting and interesting new kind of Australopithecus. that was named in 1938. I'm standing at the site of where robust fossils were found, at a site called Swartkrans. And at the tip of my finger is Sterkfontein, where Mrs. Ples was found. So you see, these are actually essentially in the same valley. These are subterranean caves. And there are many solution cavities like that throughout the Transvaal region. And in fact, we're going to talk about one recently found by a young American scholar. And in 1948, Broom and Robinson, in tow, of course, went off and started to look at Swartkrans. This is 10 years after Chrome Dry. And they found a treasure trove of fossils of these robust Australopithecus. And these are just examples of beautiful, fairly complete crania, as you can see, and very heavily built jaws, very large teeth, very heavily built skulls, and we'll look at those in more detail. And of course, the ones from Swartkrans should have a different name. And he noticed that the teeth that were broken had very thick enamel. And he thought that made them different from anything else. And he put them into Paranthropus, right? We're not using Paranthropus anymore. Some people still use it for these robust forms. And he called it crassidens. Crassus means thick, and dens, of course, means teeth, like dental. But this has now been subsumed under Australopithecus and called Australopithecus robustus. You can see these are fairly large teeth, fairly heavily worn, with very thick enamel in very strongly built, robust jaws. This was certainly a different species of Australopithecus from Africanus. So we have robustus at Chrome Dry and at Swartkrans. We have Africanus at Tong and at Sterkfontein. And with the work at Swartkrans, they've recovered many, many fossils, as I showed you. And we'll talk about the details of the skull anatomy shortly. But I wanted to show you that these are sections through teeth, okay? So if you look at the robust forms, which are these, right here, and we will speak next time or in ensuing lectures about East Africa, so let's not consider that, Boisei, but look at crassidens, and you see what I mean? Look at the thickness of that dental anatomy compared to the thickness of Africanus. It's very thick. So this is an adaptation to obviously a diet that's really wearing those teeth down. And the thick enamel, the hardest substance in your body, right? In a mammal's body, the hardest substance is enamel. That will extend the life of the tooth, extend the ability to chew and food, and extend the life of the animal. Whereas in Africanus, it was clearly much thinner, but in robustus, and we now call crassidens robustus, you can see how incredibly thick that is. Now, apes have relatively thin enamel, as you see, which means that as soon as a tooth starts to wear in, say, a chimp or gorilla, the dentine shows through, the inner layer. You have on the outside enamel, and then this layer in here is called dentine. And you will see the little islands of dentine begin to appear very quickly. Humans have retained a fairly thick enamel, not as thick for certain as robustus, but a thick enamel that allows our teeth to live longer lives so that we can live longer lives. So we'll go on in the next presentation and look at Australopithecus robustus in more detail.